to come and talk a little bit about basic soil health, how to choose a cover crop, and how to work with different cover crops throughout the state of Montana, because we all have different soil types. So I'll turn it over to Kate.
Perfect. So do I just need to share my screen for the presentation?
Yeah, Lindsay here will get it on shared screen here.
Okay. So like Justin said, Mark and I started, Mark started dabbling with cover crops on his own place in 2011. And I started working with farmers across the state kind of around that time as well. And so we decided that we could maybe do something a little different and make, offer cover crops, learn a little bit ourselves, because we were seeing that, some people were failing or it wasn't working great. And so we went ahead and started North 40 Ag to try to help people, to provide the education that goes with implementing a cover crop. And kind of over the course of time and learning, we've learned quite a bit about how to implement cover crops and what species and all that. But then there's a whole big side of that I was going to kind of address a little bit today. So let's see.
You should have the ability to do it, Kate.
Okay. Are you telling me what you're seeing?
Still just you, Kate. Now there you go.
You see it?
Yep.
But not in presentation mode.
No.
Okay. Good?
Yep, you're there now.
Perfect. So I have a almost 2-year-old daughter next week, so we've been watching a lot of Monsters Inc. and Monsters University. So that's why we kind of did Soil Health U, because it's always on my mind. It was Moana for a while, but we've moved on. So I'll kind of get around to what I was thinking from this as we go through the presentation, but kind of give you an update of where my life is right now. So I'm sure you guys have all heard this, as in every time we're talking about cover crops or soil health, we really like to hit on those 5 principles of soil health. One of them being cover. Cover's probably, if you have to choose a favorite principle, I don't know if that's possible, but choosing a favorite principle, cover makes the most sense to me. It seems the most applicable in our climate. Seems like a really big ticket item that if you can maybe just do cover and maybe you don't do as good on some of the others, you're going to really start making some headway from a soil health standpoint. The reason being is cover is kind of interconnected with some of the others anyway, but in our dry climate, it really makes a huge difference. So, that extra cover that's on the soil, it's going to protect and insulate the soil from heat. So we're going to see less in evaporation. So we're going to keep more of that water that falls from the sky in the soil, in that root zone for plants to be able to use. In addition, it's going to keep that soil cooler, which is going to help the soil biology. It's going to keep that biology thriving. As that soil temperature tends to increase, what we see happen is that soil biology starts to die off. It's just not ideal conditions for that biology to live once it gets, in the high hundreds. And what we've seen is, I can plug a thermometer in the ground where there's bare soil, where there's soil cover, and where there's soil cover with some canopy. And we can have up to 30, 40, 50 degree temperature difference from where that bare soil is, to where it's under shade and cover. And you can kind of see this yourself. Would you rather stand in an asphalt parking lot on a hot day, or would you rather stand in the shade under a tree on the grass? So you can just feel that temperature difference yourself, so you know that that's also happening in our systems. The other really big thing about soil cover is it slows raindrops. So a lot of the storms that we tend to get in the western part of the United States, where we are dryers, we get very intensive, short duration storms. So we're getting a high amount of rainfall in a short amount of time. And without soil cover, that hits those individual soil particles and busts them apart and causes a surface crusting, causing them to, a lot of that moisture to run off. With soil cover, it slows that raindrop down, and it gives it a spot to kind of slowly get into the ground. So we are capturing a lot more of the rain that falls when we have good cover on the soil. And last, I guess, from a soil cover perspective, it is providing a lot of food to the soil biology. So both, arthropods, some of your big bugs are going to start breaking some of this down. The extracts from those, or what they excrete, is going to become food for the next amount of bugs, bacteria and fungi and protozoa. So it's just kind of a whole process of, one, it's going to provide some shelter, some from heat, it's going to provide water, but then it's also going to provide food. So that cover is kind of like meeting all of those life needs. The next thing that's pretty important from a soil principle perspective is living roots. So as we all know, plants do photosynthesis. So they take carbon dioxide and water, and through photosynthesis with a little bit of sunlight, they produce sugars or carbohydrates. And plants release or excrete between 2 to 70%, depending on the type of plant and some of the literature, of those carbohydrates that they produce out through the plant. So this is where it gets hard talking on a Zoom call. Normally I would like call somebody out and ask them why that was, but in a Zoom call, it's a little bit more difficult. But the reason the plants do this is they're basically trying to feed that soil biology. Now, but when they're feeding that soil biology, which needs that carbon source, in turn, they're kind of building a relationship. In turn, that biology is going to do some critical function for the plant. So whether it be they just eat some of that carbon and they are excreting out nitrogen right there next to the plant, or they're actually making a direct symbiotic relationship with the plant, like what we see with legumes, or they're actually providing some protection. Maybe there's just so much of a number of biology around that plant that a bad pest or bug can't get into that root in order to do damage. So that plant is getting a benefit by excreting out all of that carbon from it. Now, what's happening? Why is that a benefit from a soil health perspective? Well, that biology does some nutrient cycling. So you're going to also start to build some carbon up in that entire root zone, so organic matter. Also, that biology is going to start building up soil structure. So, it's going to take, there's like tiny little masons in the soil. So they're going to take sand, silt, and clay particles like bricks and start building them up and building rooms under there, building pore space. And that's just going to hold water and nutrients and kind of start that ball rolling for the next plant. So as your soil gets healthier, it in turn benefits your plants, but then you also store a lot more of those nutrients and water and everything. The longer that you have these plants growing, so if in our climate, we do have a window of time that maybe we can't be growing something, maybe not in this year because it's been so open, but in a lot of years we have a window of time where it's too cold or too snowy or too wet or whatever in order to grow something. And so the longer time period that we can have something growing, the more carbon we're putting into the ground. And so it's always a benefit to have something growing out there. Moving on to the next one, diversity. So the next principle is diversity, and diversity is very important, and it kind of from a different perspective. So if I ask each one of you what your favorite meal is, I can guarantee that we're going to hear a different meal from each individual person, right? And we're just one species, we are all just human. Well, if you take a teaspoon of soil, healthy soil is going to have up to 50,000 different species in it. And each carbon signature that's coming out of the plant is going to be a little bit different. So there's going to be a different set of biology that's going to go with each different type of carbon. So the more diversity we can have out there, the more diversity we go after for soil biology, which can do more functions as far as building up the soil. And then the more diverse biology that we have out there, they're going to help prevent disease. So we're going to build up the beneficials and kind of outcompete some of the pests. Same thing with above ground, we're going to stop and prevent some diseases. And then we're also going to be able to prevent even pest bugs from coming when we have a lot of diversity in the field. The next one in the picture is grazing. Grazing was one of the later added soil health principles. And we can see a huge benefit. You're adding a whole nother diversity component to your system by adding in livestock, whether it be, sheep or cows or chickens or whatever your chosen livestock model is. They're going to add diversity. They're going to help start that nutrient cycling as they start to eat some of that cover crop or grass or whatever you have out there. They're going to start to break that down, making it more available for the biology in the soil for your saprophytic fungi, things that are going to be breaking it down, not necessarily living off some of the carbon in the plants. These are the ones that are going to break down residues and start converting some of that into organic matter and building up that soil. They also can help, in a management standpoint, they can really help do some key things as far as benefiting the soil. But they also add diversity from their life. So the biology that's in their saliva is going to be transferred to the soil. They're going to be able to stomp things onto the ground. They're going to add a lot of differences from a diversity standpoint. And then the last one that I want to kind of hit on, or you hear a lot about, is reducing disturbance. And so what reducing disturbance does, typically when we think of farming, or what we used to think of farming, I guess, was, tilling everything up and planting a crop letting that grow. Well, reducing disturbance is going to keep that soil structure intact. And not just the structure of those individual pore spaces, but the infrastructure of the soil. So if we think of the soil as a city or a country, we have individual buildings or individual rooms within the soil, but then there's going to be highways and everything that are connecting it. So biology can move underneath the soil, air, water, nutrients is all moving through the soil. When we come through with a wrecking ball or some sort of natural disaster of an event that's making a huge disturbance, we're basically taking a step back from where we were building before. So when we reduce our disturbance, we're going to keep those pores intact, keep that infrastructure intact. The other thing it does is it maintains that cover. So we talked about all of the benefits of cover, then we're going to see the soil cover on the surface of the soil stay intact as we're reducing that disturbance. And then it's also going to maintain that soil biology. And disturbance can be, a physical disturbance of a tillage pass, but it could also be chemical. That chemical disturbance is going to be doing, damage to the actual biology that's in the ground. And so, if we can reduce that and try to look at our crop rotations or our system a little bit different approach of maybe not relying on tillage or chemical as much. Obviously, one of them, they might be necessary as we're starting that process, but if we can start to fill in those gaps by keeping living roots, outcompeting weeds, using grazing as a tool to, move forward and, outcompete weeds or terminate a crop or anything like that, we can start to couple these together to really start to achieve a lot. So we just went over all the principles of soil health, and this is where it'd be really awesome to ask you as a group, but what do you think the biggest influencer or factor to accomplish soil health? I'm gonna kind of let you think on that. Is it, we just went through those 5 principles of cover, grazing, diversity, keeping a living root, and reducing disturbance. Any ideas of what that biggest influencer to accomplish soil health? So this is something I feel like is not addressed a lot of times. We listen to soil health talks and we, take all these ideas home. But the one thing we don't look into is you. So kind of as we look at what's going to make sure that as you implement these things, what are your, how are you going to get this done? When you're looking at trying to bite off a soil health or trying to improve your soil or implement a practice that is going to get you to that step, you really have to take and look at what your goals are and everything like that. So you're the biggest factor. One thing I say a lot is if you're not on the operation, then the soil health is not improving. We're not seeing become more sustainable or regenerative without you. So that is something that's pretty key and important. It's also soil health is very unique to you. So what you might judge as soil health or improvement might not be the same measure that somebody else is judging as soil health or soil improvement. So in order to get kind of started down this path of understanding like what it means to you and how to implement some of those things, you really have to start at what is your why. As we started our business, North 40 Ag, we really had kind of a progression of like where we are. So I know that when I got out of college, out of grad school, I mean, I just was very passionate. I wanted to change the world. I was going to make a difference and make an impact. And as I've started to get older and learn, I came in, I was going to change agriculture. I was going to do all of these things. And so when we started North 40 Ag, we were really focused on this. And as we've grown and started really working with people, a lot of that has changed because we've realized where our why is and what's really truly important to us. And it's not that I don't want to change agriculture and see our farmers across the state really improve and change some of their practices. But what I've seen is people and community are really important to me. And so as I started to focus internally on what we're doing, we've kind of changed our goals as well. So for North 40 Ag, our why is to build a community to improve lives through agriculture. So we're using that as a tool to really help people. So looking back to what is your why are you on your operation? Are you there because you are passionate about the soil? And I think that things can change over time as you grow as a person. So maybe you're there and you've recently graduated or whatever, you're very passionate about soil, you're excited about the learning process. So your why might be learning, or your why might be the soil. Or I mean, I've seen a million t-shirts and sweatshirts that say something about I'm happy when my cows are happy, or anything along those sorts. So maybe it's livestock, maybe the cows are really what just get you going, and that's what makes you excited every day to jump out of bed, is to take care of the livestock. You know, maybe it's history. Maybe it's where your family's operation has come from or has gone, or the community, and you see the interactions of the benefits that you're providing to the community with your operation. Maybe it's wildlife and building up, you know, something that's very environmentally stable, and, you know, you're addressing concerns from an environmental standpoint. Maybe it's, I have the tractor on there because my husband's why might be sometimes I feel like tractors. Like we stop at every John Deere dealership whenever we're traveling. So, you know, why he might have really a bigger why, that is definitely a component of something that makes him happy and that he enjoys on the operation. Maybe it's family. So you want to make sure that you provide a lifestyle for your family that you're excited about. And maybe it's something to, you know, move that operation forward so you're leaving something better for your family. But really, I challenge you to figure out what is your why. And then from that point, you can really start to structure how you're going to achieve improving your operation, improving your soil health, structured around you. And then it's just going to improve the likelihood of your success. So after you determine your why, really look at your goals from, you know, an economic, a quality of life, or a scenic beauty. I like to categorize, so this is taken from, you know, an Alan Savory kind of approach. When you're looking at trying to, you know, make your goals for managing your operation, look at them from these three kind of buckets. And then it gives you an idea of, you know, really what do you need, rather than just, you know, saying like, I want to grow wheat. If you grow wheat, does that fit into the quality of life that you need? Maybe it meets your economic goals, but, you know, it doesn't maybe meet what you want the operation to look like, or how much time it takes you to put in for that. So in an economic standpoint, when you're looking at setting that goal, after you've picked your why, you're going to say, okay, how profitable do we need to be? What do I need to be bringing in order for me to maintain all of the other buckets? In order to do that, you know, maybe I just look at, maybe there are some operations out there that don't need to be profitable. They're using it as an investment, or they're using it as a wildlife operation. So, you know, profitability isn't their main concern. So where do you kind of fall on that? Within that, okay, do you have enough that you can hire help, you know, to maybe help with the other buckets as well? So all of your buckets of economics and quality of life and what you want it to look like are all going to be very intertwined. So when you're looking at your quality of life goals, what is that? Is that having weekends off, or working 24/7, or is it incorporating your children into the operation? Is it, you know, is it to stay comfortable, or, you know, always continue learning new things? So it's kind of where your quality of life is and where you want to be. And you can kind of see already where some of those are going to interact. You know, maybe you're trying a bunch of new soil health things, and your profitability is going to be low, but you're working your tail off. So does that fit into what you want to do? And this is where, you know, putting some of these goal settings in with your soil health is really going to help improve your success, and what we've seen over time with a lot of producers. Scenic beauty is like, what do you want it to look like? Do you know, are cows important on the landscape? Do you want to just see wheat? Is it important for you to have wildlife? You know, a cover crop? And you can kind of see that all of these are, like I said, interconnected to, you know, time to maintain things, the cost, and then, you know, what the looks of that facility, what you want to do. So setting your goals is going to be very key to, you know, moving you forward. After you've set your why, you know, seen what you're looking for, you've set your individual goals, it's really important to look and inventory what you have. And so some of that is going to be your personal experience, what you've learned over time. It's going to be what is your soil. So, you know, soil in one portion of the state, or even one portion of your farm, might be completely different. It might need a different management strategy than, you know, some on a different side. What is your environment or your equipment? You know, you're looking at, you know, what can you grow with your equipment? How much rainfall do you get? So what are some of the things you can grow? What elevation are you? Maybe it's really difficult for you to get warm seasons into your rotation. Do you have irrigation? Where are you at in the state? You know, these are all going to be things that are, you know, tailored to you. So where are your markets, etc. So tailoring it to your individual environment is very important. But don't let these hinder you either. You know, talking to guys who are implementing soil health practices, a lot of times we hear, you know, it's too dry where I live, or it's too rocky, I can't use this piece of equipment, or it's too windy and it just dries everything out. One that I've seen a lot, or even in our own operation, is, you know, family pushback, you know, getting everybody on board. But that's where, when you're trying to build some of these things up, if you can get everybody centered on a single goal of the why and what you're here for, and then you can kind of start to divide out those buckets, of economics and quality of life and your scenic beauty or what you want it to look like, then you start to get united and you don't see as much of that family pushback. You might be able to, I've heard guys say like, oh, I have the wrong drill, so I can't do anything, or I don't have access to fences or water, or it just plain doesn't work here, or it's too cold, or the elevation is too high. So even though you're going to be tailoring your goals to what your environment, what your capabilities are, what your entire system, tailoring it to you essentially, don't let that become excuses for not moving forward. Definitely try to think outside the box and work through those. So going kind of back, I forgot to mention, so when I talked about why, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with Simon Sinek. So he's kind of kind of from a business standpoint, he's talking about, does a lot with like leadership, but he talks about looking at your why, then your how and your what. And a lot of times when we're looking at things, we all focus on the what's because they're the easy things to kind of check off the list. And if you start from the center and you start at your why and come out from there, you can really start to see an improvement and change how you're getting things done. So how are you going to do some of these things? No-till. So, if you do no-till, you're obviously going to, it's going to go through and look at several of those buckets that you're, trying to do. Can no-till help improve, your time availability, for your quality of life, spending more time with your children maybe? Or is it going to help your profitability? Is it, you might have the investment of the drill, but can you pay that back, over time with maybe less fuel, or being able to grow more diverse crops, or building that residue and storing more water, so maybe potentially you're going to get more yield. So looking at that economic perspective. As you do no-till, are you going to start attracting more wildlife, or looking differently? Or even maybe it's the, as you're changing things. I know that when we started some no-till on our operation, especially on the flood, it was hard for a lot of the family to kind of see something that wasn't clean tilled and brown and pretty. But now they see the opposite. So now when the wind blows and things aren't moving across the field, they like the way that looks as well. So sometimes it's going to take a little time, even after you set your goals, to see what you actually, want and where you feel about all of those different things. But yeah, for example, crop rotation and cover crops, high intensity grazing. The other thing you might think of is like kind of thinking outside the box to make some of these goals work. So I hear a lot of times, I don't have cows, so I can't make this work. But there are plenty of young people that I've talked to out there that are chomping at the bit to buy cows or to do something, and they would work their tail off putting up electric fence and hauling water if they had somewhere to graze. So, if something you're interested in, you might be able to, lease that grazing to a neighbor or a young person who's interested in that, and they might be able to graze some of the things for you. Looking into new markets or creating new markets. I've had, especially with Corona and people adverse to going to grocery stores or having shortages at grocery stores. Over the last few years, we've seen box beef kind of becoming more popular. And I've talked to a few farmers and ranchers this year who are already starting their own box beef operations that they're going to be selling. So thinking of out of the box ideas, whatever is a problem doesn't necessarily mean it's a problem. If it's your goal, if it's in your why, if it's in your buckets of of the goals that you want to achieve, don't let it stop you. Just push forward and really try to move that needle. So it's kind of being that creative. So on to the what's. A lot of times when I've done talks in the past, and especially framed around cover crops, we talk a lot about the what's, and I used to actually phrase them as whys. So why are you planting a cover crop? Which realistically, these are the what do you need to be accomplished in order to make this cover crop beneficial to you. So when you're looking at your operation, like thinking of all of these what's, what do you need to achieve and how is this improving your goals? So are you looking at you need to suppress weeds? Can you do, when you're looking at what your goals are, if weed suppression is a problem, maybe that's introducing grazing, and that helps also fill the bucket of what you want it to look like because you want cattle out there, or cattle are part of your quality of life. If you want to increase your organic matter, so your hows are going to help trickle down and make all of these things happen. So, maybe doing no-till is going to help increase that organic matter, or planting a cover crop is going to improve your winter feed, and possibly, promote beneficial insects, which, then this is going to go back to maybe your scenic beauty. You're going to have lots of flowers out there. So there's a lot of what's that you need to think about, decreasing your saline seep, diversity, nutrient cycling, compaction, stimulating your mycorrhizal fungi, which are going to bring nutrients back to your plants, improve your water infiltration, increase the nutrient density of your grains, increasing your profitability, continuing learning. So, that might be back to your quality of life. That might be something that's important to you. Bringing excitement of a new operation, attracting wildlife, capturing soil nutrients, involving the next generation, and increasing soil cover. So these are just a few of what's that I kind of was thinking of as I was building this, but really a lot of these are going to just come from as you set your goals. These are going to be the results of what you're going to start seeing. Because the one thing from other soil health talks that I've kind of taken away, and I've even seen on our own places, don't expect the same results that you see from somebody else. So when we talk about, there's your different environmental spec, you are very unique. Your individual, from an individual standpoint, your operation, the equipment you have, your tools available that you have, what your goals are. So even though you might be starting off and trying to get the same, same thing, for example, you might be wanting to do exactly what Gabe Brown is doing, but with your set of tools, with your environment, it might not come out exactly the same. It doesn't mean that you're not being successful, and it doesn't mean that you're not achieving your goal. It's just showing that you're not going to get exactly the same results, because we are all individuals. And maybe not tomorrow, but you might go, you might be the one who's going past and doing more than what Gabe's doing because of your unique, circumstances. So, you might not be able to grow flax, or you might not be into the winter grazing for certain reasons, but don't expect those same results. So kind of talk about how soil health affects different things, different locations. So, from a location standpoint, we might see that you have different input prices. What it costs to maybe buy seed around Billings. If say you're close to us and you're getting cover crop from us, it might be less expensive because you can pick it up right here. But as you get further away, you might have shipping costs that are involved with that, or it might be really difficult to get to markets. Like I see that a lot in eastern Montana. They want to grow, different things, and they're hauling all things all the way back to Pompey's, or, at the same time they're closer to North Dakota, so it might be easier for them to grow sunflowers. So your markets are going to drive your, the return on what you're growing, but it also gives you the opportunity to grow different things. Don't let it hinder you. There's might be things that you can create your own markets. I've seen that, with the box beef, or with, farms that are starting to put, make their own products, a direct consumer product back, there. So location's going to play a role. Location's also going to play a role in like your average rainfall. Where you are is going to determine how much rain you get. It doesn't mean that you can't do soil health. You're just going to see a difference in the amount of productivity, and maybe how quickly you're getting to that process, or to that step of what you're looking for to meeting your final goal. If you're in a lower rainfall area, you can definitely still do all of the principles of soil health. It just is going to take you a little bit longer to maybe achieve the same as somebody who is in higher rainfall area. We've seen this on our own place where our dryland stuff is progressing. We're seeing it change and seeing progress being made, but we can see significant leaps and bounds differences on the irrigation when we start to implement the same principles. Just because we can grow so much more biomass, so much more carbon, we can see that cycle start to build soil structure. Within a year or two, compared to on the dryland, it's taking us like 7 to 10 years to really start see some of the same, some of the same differences that we're seeing on the irrigated in like 1 year. Your soil type's going to play an important role as well. Like I said, you might have different types across the farm, but definitely across the state, we're going to see different types. Your sandier soils are not going to hold as much water. So the same thing, you're not going to get that above that amount of biomass, that amount of carbon that's going to be stored in soil to really build that soil organic matter. Your higher clay soils, they hold nutrients better. They're going to have more pore spaces for those bugs to live in. They're going to hold that water better. So you're going to start to see a clay or a coarser or a finer textured soil, it might improve a little bit quicker. But if it's been damaged, if you've had a lot of compaction, you don't have a lot of life in it, it might take time for that life to come in to start to improve what you're seeing there, you know, that compaction. So soil type does play a role, and it's going to be, you know, that's where you're going to see a lot on the productivity and then the output side. I wouldn't let any of these necessarily limit your why or your goals, because you can still see improvements from them, but this is going to kind of give you an idea. Your drill is going to play a role. If you have a conventional drill, then you might not be able to do no-till, but it's not saying that you can't do improvements. Maybe you do a light tillage pass, you plant it, and you're trying to recover as quickly as possible and keep something growing. You know, a lot of times as you're starting down the system, I don't want somebody, you know, especially depending on where their buckets lie and where, you know, what kind of economic returns they have or what kind of economics they have to start the process. I don't necessarily want somebody to go buy a brand new drill or change up their equipment to put in a new crop rotation or new crop into their rotation to try to make these improvements. So a lot of times you can kind of hop along with what you have, and over time you might see improve to yourself that it's beneficial to, you know, take that next step of buying something new. But you can definitely start forward down the road of improving your soil with any drill. It's just going to change how you're doing that. You might not have the same rotation. You might not be able to put in, you know, a cover crop. So for example, if I'm talking to a guy who's putting in a cover crop and has a hoe drill, we'll probably pull sunflowers. I've seen, you know, in personal experience where, you know, you're raking up those sunflower stalks, because whether you're grazing them or letting them stand, you know, they don't really get broke down in that time period. And so that sunflowers are just, you know, as that hoe drill goes across, it's acting like a rake. Now, if you have a disc drill, we might change up and, you know, have different things grow, you know, in that mix or in your rotation. So it's not going to cause a problem for you in the future. Another thing you might think of besides a drill is it might be like, what kind of combine head do you have? So, you know, if you don't have a corn head, that might not be an option to put into your rotation, because there's no sense of buying that if you can maybe get some of the same benefits without having to make that investment. And the crop rotation is going to be completely unique to each individual. So it's not just going to be based on your location and your climate. It's going to be based on what you want to see, what equipment you have, what your soil types are, what you're trying to achieve. And so all of these things are going to be very personal and how you're going to implement them. Grazing is another one. So what you're grazing, when you're grazing, what other resources do you have to graze? Maybe somebody else is grazing for you. So that it's going to play an effect on how you implement this system. Your community support. So in your community, are you okay with, you know, taking some of the flack that they might be giving you when you know, plant something new or different or do something different? Or is there community support, excuse me, that they might be able to help you out, you know, if you're running into some issues? And wildlife can definitely be really different in different locations of the state. On the western side, where we see elk, a lot of times it's going to play a factor of what you're planting, maybe for a cover crop or when you're grazing a cover crop, because they're going to potentially obliterate that cover crop before you get a chance to graze it. So you've made this investment. And so in other areas of the state, there's not going to be the same wildlife pressures that we have, you know, all over. So it's going to definitely play a role and see differences across all of these locations. So one example I kind of wanted to use just to give you an idea to kind of bring it a little closer to home is one producer we had on the left is over Toston, Manhattan, Three Forks area, and had planted a cover crop underneath the understory of his corn. And on the right, that was a cover crop or soybeans that we had planted under ours. And this was in a really good location where this picture was taken on the right. So the whole field really didn't look like that. But you can still see there's a lot of bare soil. And that kind of goes to a location difference. So these were both under pivot irrigation, both corn that was going to be silaged. But over here, outside of Billings, our corn is going to be planted at a higher population. It's going to be a different day length, and so it's going to get a lot taller and shade the canopy and not provide as much light down lower for something to really grow. Over in the Toston Three Forks area, you can see this was planted at a lower population, the corn was, and if the corn's not going to get as tall over there as it does here. And so you can see that there was a lot more opportunity for a cover crop to grow underneath that. So after they took that off, they were able to go out and potentially graze that. They're getting a lot of differences as far as, that diversity component and, really meeting their goals. So what you get isn't always going to be the same and is not going to always work the same. And, just because of soil type or location or equipment. So definitely keep that in mind, that it really has to be tailored to you and your environment. So your why and setting your why and making sure that you have that is going to improve your success. And I guess this wasn't all about soil health like I've done in the past, but I've seen some of the biggest issues for implementation and guys being successful is not looking at that big picture of what they're trying to achieve. And they're kind of rushing into it. So I really wanted to focus on something a little bit different and still talk about how soil health can be implemented across different things, as Justin had mentioned, different environments and situations. But I wanted to really focus on you and make sure that you know what you're trying to achieve in order to improve your success. So I went through that a little quick, but I guess if anybody has any questions, then I'm available.
Kate, can you talk about, your neighbor might be using cover crops and you've never used them before. What would the process be? Would a phone call to you to come out and check the soil types first, or, what's the best way to start the conversation if you've never done cover crops?
So really, I think it goes back to like what you're trying to achieve. So, kind of going back to setting that why, and I think that soil is important, but I think that there's a lot of other factors that are going to play almost a bigger role in your success. What you're needing to get out of that, what you want it to look like. I've had one example is when we first started, I had a guy plant a cover crop who had been just, dominantly a wheat farmer. And so I got a phone call after it had come up and just is completely upset, mad that, it looks like a whole bunch of weeds out there. And so he was going to spray it out. So I go out there to go look at it and there wasn't a single weed. It was all cover crop, but it was going back to what he was used to looking at and what he was comfortable with. And so that was played a pretty big factor. So soil is important. And I think that we can, you're going to just gauge the productivity or your results from what you're going to get out of your soil. It's not going to be as much into the planning, more so what you're trying to get out of it. It's going to be in the planning, and what equipment and tools you have available are going to play a bigger role. So if somebody was trying to start a cover crop, I'd say, give a call and we'll kind of run through that. We'll see what they're trying to achieve, what equipment they have, some of their limitations. We'll talk about soil and make that kind of in that line of factors that when we're doing that planning, but it would be just one factor of the whole gamut of lists. And you can call me, you can call your local NRCS person, you can talk to your neighbor. Any of those factors are available to kind of start the ball rolling.
When you're building cover crop into your rotation, I guess cost effectiveness, what do you speak about that? As far as
it really depends on what you're looking for. So, say you have the opportunity to graze it, you have a potential higher return on your investment than somebody who isn't going to graze it at all. And so it's going to play a factor of to what you're gauging that you can get out of it. And going back to when you set your goals for, what do you need out of that from a rotation as a whole? When you're looking at your rotation, maybe your profitability, you can sacrifice a little because, in the long term, you might gain some from what you're going to gain from that cover crop. But I've also built mixes that are, going to be grazed that might be in that, $25 range. But I've also built mixes from a guy who doesn't have grazing, but just wants to get the benefit of a cover crop, in a wheat rotation around the $12 to $15 range. We just really will pull back on some of the quantity of stuff that's out there. So we might not have quite of a high of a population. We might be able to go with cheaper species because you're not trying to really push that grazing component. And so you can definitely see a fluctuation based on what you need out of it and what your goals are of what you're trying to achieve.
Sure. We have a question in the chat. It says, I believe you said light tillage at one point. What is that?
Well, not crazy, like not moldboard plowing. It depends on what you need to do. So a lot of times I have guys who have a conventional drill that are trying to put in a cover crop and move forward. So they might just run something to break up that surface, some of the residue on the soil surface, like a light disc or something like that across, so they can get their drill in. So light tillage would be what, if you don't have a no-till drill that's going to be able to cut through residue, that you're going to do whatever tillage is necessary for you to get that drill in, but not go, you know, rip it or go through and plow it or anything like that. So it's going to depend on what your situation is. I also kind of go back to, you know, when we're talking about disturbance, a lot of times there's questions of, you know, tillage versus chemical and which is better. And that goes back to a very, like, that's very focused on you as well. It's where you feel comfortable, what works for you. Whether you're doing chemical or tillage, my recommendation is to do as little of both of those as possible. You know, obviously, as you're improving your soil health, you're going to require a little bit more of each of those until you get, you know, moved down the line. But if you know, wherever you stand on your thoughts on either one of them, I don't want you to choose one based on what is important to me. You need to make sure you're choosing it based on what's important to you. So, you know, to answer that question is, it's going to depend on what your situation is and what tools you have available. So, I mean, I don't want to recommend a disc if you don't have a disc because all you have is, you know, a harrow or a cultivator. It's going to depend on what tools you have available to say what light tillage is.
Okay, we have another question, Kate. It says, how was the cover crop planted with corn in the Toston area?
So they actually flew that one on. So they planted the corn, and then at that V4 stage, they flew the cover crop on and then irrigated it up. He just kind of did it in a strip. And so he wasn't able to like measure to see what the difference was from a yield standpoint because it wasn't enough of a quantity, but it was kind of just a trial to see what he could get to grow. The corn health and everything, scouting it from a scouting perspective looked the same. It didn't really look any different. So it's hard to say if there was a, you know, what if it improved or if it hurt the yield or anything like that. But that's kind of where they started. And they looked at, it really wasn't fenced this year, but potentially they were looking at grazing it after they silaged that corn.
Kate, I've noticed more central to eastern Montana, we're starting to see more of an emergence of people growing corn. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to why the popularity of that's increased?
I just think sometimes when guys call me from a cover crop standpoint, there's just like with ranchers, there's just some sort of excitement with growing corn. I think that we see so much out there about corn across the entire country, and we know that cattle like corn, so it makes it kind of exciting to see if we can do that. It also is, you know, a very beneficial from a rotation standpoint. It's a warm season grass in the rotation. You know, if you do use chemical from a rotation and a cropping standpoint, you have a lot of options for weed control if you have a problem weed from like a traditional wheat rotation or something. Also, you see just a difference in that, you know, you open a window up or you're planting a little later, so you might be able to control something different, but you also just starts to change that balance of what's out there. So corn does put a lot of, you know, as a C4 plant, it puts a lot of carbon into the ground. And then I also think that people there, you know, there's different markets now that are a lot closer to home. Like we've brought in a lot of corn from North Dakota in the past. And so now there's, you know, rather than bringing it all in from North Dakota, people are growing it and they're able to sell it a lot more locally. So I think there's a lot of different factors of why we're seeing more corn. But I do think that it's just one of those things that we see across the region and it just makes people excited to grow.
Sure. I don't see any other questions, so I'll ask one more. Have you been seeing any increase, or have you guys done anything with industrial hemp?
I've been to some of the fields with industrial hemp, but I've seen it, I mean, from what our experience, we've seen it kind of taper off in the last couple of years. We haven't seen as much. And yeah, so we haven't done a lot with the cover crop standpoint with the hemp. And especially last year I saw less than I'd seen in 2019, I guess. But that's just maybe I didn't talk to the right people, so.
Sure. All right, it looks like that's about all the questions and stuff we have. So thank you, Kate, for joining us, and that was a great presentation and very helpful. Look forward to working with you more in the future.
Thanks. Let me know if you guys have any questions, email or give us a call.
Thanks, Kate.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll take a little break and we'll get back on here at 10:30, and we'll finish with Ryan Goodman and kind of his keynote address. to finish out our conference. So that'll be Ryan Goodman at 10:30.